The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
That agent had to use self-defense and take up his weapon to protect his own life.
Tensions escalate in Minneapolis. Violent clashes between protesters and federal officials after a second ICE-involved shooting in a week. President Trump threatening to invoke a rarely used law to quell the unrest. And Iran strike seemingly delayed as the White House weighs its options. The deadly Middle East crackdown forcing millions into darkness. Plus, a major cross-Atlantic meeting over ownership of Greenland. The country's attempting to find a diplomatic common ground as the president takes a new aggressive approach. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News. Now, thank you for joining us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with tensions in Minneapolis between protesters and federal agents. The Minneapolis Office of Community Safety says 2 children, including a 6-month-old, were hospitalized after getting hit with tear gas dispersed by federal agents this week. Customs and Border Protection officials say some of the protesters were taken into custody. President Trump is threatening to send in more troops if the protests continue. President Trump announcing Thursday via Truth Social he will invoke the Insurrection Act if Minnesota politicians, quote, don't obey the law. The rarely used law gives the president authority to deploy the military without congressional approval. The National News Desk, Jeff Harris, has more on the chances this law takes effect.
I'm told if tensions continue to rise in Minneapolis, which on Wednesday saw its second ICE-involved shooting in the span of a week, there is a chance President Trump signs off on the Insurrection Act, sending military troops into the city, something that hasn't happened in the United States in over 30 years. On Thursday, President Trump taking to Truth Social, delivering a blunt message to Minnesota. Obey the law and stop attacking federal agents, or he will invoke the Insurrection Act.
He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that. My hope is that this leadership team in Minnesota will start to work with us to get criminals off the streets.
Following Trump's threat, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz making a direct appeal to the president, writing on X, quote, "Let's turn the temperature down, stop the campaign of retribution. This is not who we are."
Your civil rights are being infringed upon by CBP and ICE, and then they want to call in troops on top of that, not to protect your civil rights, but claiming that they're protecting CBP and ICE.
The Insurrection Act allows the president to deploy the U.S. military without prior congressional approval, a law former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani tells us Trump has the authority to use.
And it can be invoked when there is a rebellion against the authority of the United States or the president is otherwise unable to enforce federal law.
Trump has threatened to invoke the act multiple times in the past, including during his first term in 2020 in response to the George Floyd protests, and multiple times in 2025, most recently in Chicago and Portland. Those protests also centered around ICE enforcement.
If ICE and other federal agents are being attacked, this is something the president may actually do, despite threatening it earlier.
Now, the threat comes following 2 ICE-involved shootings in Minneapolis. The first, January 7th, when an ICE agent shot and killed 37-year-old Renee Good.
No!
Officials claiming she weaponized her vehicle and tried to run over the agent. But also as protests continue across the city. Footage capturing fireworks being launched at law enforcement. And independent journalist Nick Sorter filming who he calls rioters breaking into a federal vehicle and stealing a rifle.
Almost there.
Oh, wow. Take a look here. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, the Insurrection Act has been invoked 30 times before, including by Presidents H.W. Bush, Lyndon B. Johnson, and President Eisenhower. The most recent time, 1992, during the L.A. riots. Now, we're told the law can be challenged in federal court, which Minnesota's Attorney General says he would do if invoked. But Rahmani says he doesn't see a federal judge stopping the deployment of U.S. troops. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
Now to Chicago, where the city's police chief is warning protesters not to box in or follow federal agents as they try to do their jobs and keep the public safe. Take a listen.
When you plow into a vehicle that contains law enforcement agents, you're using deadly force. And they can use deadly force in response to stop you. We need to be clear about these laws.
Many anti-ICE protests have been seen across the Windy City since a 37-year-old was fatally shot by an ICE agent in Minnesota last week. Chicago was the first city the Trump administration cracked down on ICE raids. Now the city has filed a lawsuit against the administration, claiming DHS has terrorized residents in an organized bombardment. Now to San Antonio, Texas, where ICE officials are sharing new details regarding an attempted arrest. This incident happened on Tuesday in a shopping area. 2 ICE vehicles blocked a car from fleeing. That car then ramming both of them in an attempt to leave. The ICE director saying one of the agents had to go to a hospital with a neck injury. The suspect taken into ICE custody, now identified as Robin Brooks. ICE saying he's from Cuba and was in the country illegally since 2024. He remains in ICE custody. A growing number of Democrats are moving to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem after the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis by an ICE officer. Illinois Congresswoman Robin Kelly is filing the articles. She alleges Noem is obstructing Congress, violating public trust, and uses her office for personal gain.
We need to use every tool in our toolbox. If we do nothing, nothing will happen. And so just really now trying to build on momentum, getting as many people signed on as possible. That's the first step.
At least 60 congressional Democrats support the move. Republicans hold majorities in both chambers, so it's unlikely to go anywhere. Noem, President Trump, and several other administration officials maintain that the officer's actions were justified. The U.S. is suspending immigrant visa processing from 75 countries for an indefinite amount of time starting next week. The affected nations include Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Haiti, Somalia, and Russia. An important distinction here is the suspension only applies to immigrant visas like those required to work in the U.S. Student and tourist visas are considered non-immigrant. The U.S. has imposed new sanctions on Iran as deadly protests continue against the regime. The sanctions target a prominent Iranian official and 18 people and companies involved in a shadow banking network linked to Iranian financial institutions. It's believed at least 2,500 protesters have been killed in the last 2.5 weeks. That number could be higher. President Trump has threatened to use the military, but backed down Wednesday after saying planned executions in Iran were canceled. U.S. lawmakers differ over the appropriate response.
We should consult with our regional partners about how we can support a movement towards democracy in Iran, but our regional allies and partners are urging us not to carry out a military strike.
I do believe that help is on the way.
When you say help is on the way, what exactly does that
mean? That means an attack on the regime is the only help that really matters.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent concedes the new sanctions are mostly symbolic. They block access to U.S. assets and businesses, but many of the targets lack U.S. funds. Let's take a look back to the 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran last summer when U.S. stealth bombers struck Iranian nuclear sites, calling it one of the military's greatest successes. After that attack, Iran retaliated with strikes on U.S. bases across the Middle East, though no American casualties were reported. Some in the U.S. doubt that Iran is genuine about ending its nuclear program and is trying to buy time. Tehran has for 2 decades insisted it will continue enriching uranium. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says she presented President Trump with her Nobel Peace Prize medal. Trump has long been vocal about believing he should win the prize. The committee has stated once it is announced, the prize cannot be shared or transferred. Machado met with Trump at the White House Thursday to discuss the future of Venezuela following the U.S. capture of then-President Nicolas Maduro earlier this month. She has praised Trump, though he previously suggested she does not have the credibility to lead Venezuela. Denmark and several European partners are increasing their military presence around Greenland as President Trump continues to press for the U.S. to acquire the island. It comes after the foreign ministers of Greenland and Denmark say they had a constructive meeting at the White House Wednesday. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the leaders to discuss President Trump's interest in taking over the Arctic island. The foreign minister of Denmark notes there clearly still is a disagreement.
We agreed that it makes sense to try to sit down on a high level to explore whether there is possibilities to accommodate the concerns of the president, while we at the same time respect the red lines of the Kingdom of Denmark.
Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, a NATO ally. President Trump says it's necessary for the U.S. to acquire the island, citing national security purposes. The foreign minister of Greenland stressed that the island wants to strengthen its cooperation with the U.S. Still, she emphasized that does not mean Greenland wants to be controlled by the U.S. We've been watching America's fentanyl crisis for years, and for a long time, it felt like the numbers only went one direction, up. But now there's a significant shift, and new research says it may not be random. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team, and I know that you dug into a new report, Emma. Tell us more about the findings.
Yeah, so this new report from Science, which is a peer-reviewed journal, they found that there's evidence the illegal fentanyl market might have experienced a major disruption, what they're calling a supply shock. The researchers looked at a bunch of signals, and they say that it appears something interrupted the flow of illegal fentanyl, meaning it might have been harder to make, harder to move, or just less available for a period of time. And they say that that disruption might have been possibly tied to actions by the Chinese government. That also lines up with a big drop in overdose deaths that started in mid to late 2023 and then continued on into 2024, both in the U.S. and in Canada.
How many people died from opioid overdoses in the last few years? What are the latest numbers?
So the numbers from this peer-reviewed journal say that about 76,000 people died from synthetic opioid overdoses in 2023. And then according to the CDC's provisional numbers, overdose deaths dropped sharply by 2024 and have been steadily declining also in 2025.
All right. And as you highlighted in this report, there seems to be some changes ongoing. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Emma will join us to dig into the opioid seizures and the latest drug data here in the U.S. Coming up, anti-government protests persist amid Iran's internet blackout. A first-generation Iranian shares accounts of the brutal crackdown, plus an unexplained illness and unanswered questions. The New Twist investigators say could be behind the mysterious Havana syndrome. As nationwide protests challenging Iran's theocracy continue with hundreds killed, the prospect for the U.S. to retaliate against the Iranian regime still hangs in the air. I spoke to first-generation Iranian and Daily Mail journalist Alina Shirazi this week. Thank you so much for being here and, of course, to share your personal perspective. What is it like to start for Iranians just stuck in the middle of the chaos under this regime? I know you still have friends and family there, and you have spoken to people on the ground.
I have, Didi, and thank you so much for having me and for covering this topic as well. What I can say really is living under the oppressive thumb of a violent regime is not something that most people will luckily ever have to experience, but for Iranians, it's their reality every single day for the past 47 years. So today marks 19 days of what the Iranian people are calling the new revolution. And at this point, the regime's bloodbath has made a lot of people retreat back into their homes. The current orders so far that I'm hearing from on the ground from the government are 3 words: shoot to kill. And they're charging families for the bullet if they want the body back of their loved ones. So it's heartbreaking.
Horrific details. And as you touched on, parallels between the past and present. Talk a little bit about the parallels between what is happening right now in Iran and the revolution back in 1979.
You know, it's a similar kind of setup. There are a lot of people on the streets protesting for their rights, but it's quite different now in a sense where we have seen Iranians really just reject the government as a whole. When the Shah was in the country in 1979, it was a one-man government, and it was easier to overthrow the government in that sense. Now you have an Iranian government that has a vast web of of proxies. We have Hezbollah, we have Hamas, we have the Houthis. What we have seen, though, over the past few days, it's quite clear that Iranians, they are not afraid to die for their freedoms. That is something that we hadn't really seen in the past few years. We've seen a snowballing since the Woman Life Movement Freedom with Mahsa Amini. We have seen a lot of women and children take to the streets as well. But it seems that this protest and these, really how people are feeling, their emotions, their willingness to die, everything has reached a fever pitch right now in the country.
Alina Shirazi, well, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your personal story. Keep us posted on the situation from the ground.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you, Dee Dee.
A cracked part found on the UPS cargo jet that crashed last year in Kentucky was flagged in a Boeing service letter in 2011. That's according to the National Transportation Safety Board. The letter released today alerted airlines to 4 failures of engine bearing races on 3 different MD-11s, but didn't consider it to be a safety risk at the time and called for visual checks every 5 years. The metal housing part found around a bearing split in 2, which caused the left engine to go over the wing of the aircraft in a lethal fireball moments after takeoff. 3 pilots on the plane and 12 people on the ground were killed. Coming up next, copper crooks on notice. The move by lawmakers to shut down the cash flow and
imperils the integrity of sport itself.
Dozens of college basketball players accused of rigging games. The DOJ charging at least 20 people in the massive alleged point shaving scheme. National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Olympia, Washington, where lawmakers are proposing a bill to stop the sale of stolen copper wire. The bill would add requirements for metal recyclers and buyers to upload photos of the metal they buy to a searchable database. The database would then give police the ability to seize the stolen wires.
We know the copper wire is being sold mostly to local recyclers. So after one of these big cable cuts, law enforcement can get on a search and see exactly where and when the cable was sold.
Copper lines are the target of the thieves, but in Washington, they often end up cutting fiber optic lines, which have no scrap value. Every cut can bring down internet, phone service, and even shut down the light rail. In Salt Lake City, Utah, the mayor's office is opposing a newly introduced bill aimed at renaming Harvey Milk Boulevard to honor conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. Officials are calling the bill an erosion of local control, citing that state involvement in street naming is unusual.
They've made it clear that their priorities are helping increase wages for workers, helping families overcome some of the challenges that they have raising children, and making sure that home ownership is still an attainable goal for people. This seems like a priority misstep.
Utah Municipal Code does give the city power to rename and dedicate streets. However, the state's constitution also does not limit the city's ability to step in. And in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, NASCAR is just about 2 weeks away from returning to the Speedway for the 2026 Clash at Bowman Gray. And several drivers and teams took to the track, turning laps to test NASCAR's new 750 horsepower package that will be used on short tracks this year. The testing allowed teams to gather on track data. The data is needed because the increased horsepower is expected to put more control in the hands of the drivers. Coming up next here on the National News Desk, an urgent warning from the FDA. The latest update in a months-long cheese recall, now expanding nationwide. Plus, technology, social media, and America's youth. Why lawmakers say screen time limits could help protect kids and teens online. Taking Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, at least 20 people are accused of rigging basketball games in the U.S. and pro competitions in China since 2022. College players were allegedly recruited to manipulate the outcomes in games. Prosecutors say the fixers placed millions of dollars in wagers, and the participating players were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. The FDA upgraded the recall for the grated Pecorino Romano cheese last week, indicating the possibility of serious health consequences or even death. The recalled cheese products have expiration dates running through May 2026. Brands include Boar's Head, Pina, Locatelli, and Sam's Club. The Pentagon is learning more about a mysterious device linked to Havana syndrome. The unexplained illness first emerged in 2016 when a cluster of U.S. diplomats stationed in Havana reported symptoms consistent with head trauma. Homeland Security paid 8 figures to buy the device in an undercover operation. Investigators say it emits pulses of radio waves and includes Russian components. Those stories and more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. To Capitol Hill we go, where there's now a fresh look at limiting kids' screen time, both in the classroom and at home. A bipartisan bill would limit social media to those over the age of 13 and help protect them from harmful impacts. The National News Desk, Taylor Murray, has more on what the bill includes and why lawmakers are now making the push to limit screen time.
A Senate hearing Thursday focusing on technology, social media, and America's youth, and why experts believe user age limits should be put in place.
Technology is fundamentally changing childhood and, in the process, undermining parents and threatening the very health of democracy.
A stark warning about social media and how it's affecting children and teenagers, not just in everyday life, but in the classroom as well.
Our kids are less cognitively capable than we were at their age.
Now Congress is trying to act. The Kids Off Social Media Act, a bipartisan bill reintroduced by Senators Ted Cruz and Brian Schatz, would ban social media for children under 13 and would prohibit social media companies from recommending content using algorithms to those under 17.
This phone-based childhood, predominantly spent on social media, has been documented to lead to social awkwardness, reduced self-confidence, a more sedentary childhood.
In addition, the bill would require schools that receive federal dollars to restrict access to social media on its devices and networks.
The University of Washington released a study last week finding that teenagers spend on average more than an hour per day on smartphones during school hours, and 1 in 4 students spends a quarter of their school day on those personal phones.
A Pew Research survey released last summer showed 74% of U.S. adults would support banning middle and high school students from using cell phones during class. Experts say parents, though, should hold the line when it comes to cell phone and social media use for their children.
Delay giving that smartphone as long as you possibly can. Delay them getting social media for as long as possible.
Around the world, other countries have started having similar discussions. Australia recently implemented a law barring kids under 16 from using social media platforms, making the first country to put such a sweeping ban in place. For the National News Desk, I'm Taylor Murray.
Coming up next here, under pressure to address affordability, the president's long-awaited health care framework aimed at lowering costs and what's in the so-called Great Health Care Plan. Plus,
where are you going? Why won't you explain yourself?
Tensions continue to flare nationwide over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, the escalating threat federal agents face on the ground and online. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News Now. Catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected. The U.S. launches the second phase of Trump's Gaza peace deal, where the focus shifts. Plus, the Supreme Court considering 2 landmark cases against state transgender sports bans. Former federal prosecutor John Fishwick talks with us about why Title IX in the Constitution might not pose as big of a challenge. Then,
we've seen a 5-time improvement in overall survival for metastatic lung cancer patients.
new hope and a new milestone in the fight against cancer. The new survival rates hitting record highs. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. Thank you for being here. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. As protests continue to erupt nationwide, so does ICE monitoring and doxing. ICE List, a website that shares the names of federal agents confirming this week. And as the National News Desk, Jeff Harris reports, a whistleblower shared the personal information of over 4,000 ICE and DHS employees, while the Trump administration says the rise is directly linked to this dangerous rhetoric coming from some lawmakers and politicians.
In its most recent report, DHS says assaults against ICE officers is up 1,300% and death threats up 8,000%. Officials calling the surge a direct result of radical rhetoric by sanctuary politicians, rhetoric that hasn't just led to more violence, but also more ICE monitoring groups and doxing. On the streets of Minneapolis, protesters and ICE agents continue to clash.
Talk to me!
Which federal officials say has played a major role in the surge of assaults, attacks, and death threats from the streets.
Death threats are up over 8,000%. Actual assaults up 1,300%. I know because threats against me and my family have tripled in the last couple of weeks.
But it's not just violence. ICE monitoring and doxing has seen an increase as well. The founder of ICE List, a website which shares the first and last names of ICE and DHS employees, confirming to the Daily Beast, following the fatal ICE-involved shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis last week, a whistleblower leaked to him the personal info of close to 4,500 federal agents, saying in part, quote, the shooting was the last straw for many people.
These individuals that are out there harassing them while they do that work, doxing their identities, threatening them and their families, it's unacceptable.
DHS attributing the rise to continuous radical rhetoric by sanctuary politicians, saying it creates an environment that demonizes law enforcement and encourages violence.
Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets. They're in unmarked vans wearing masks, being shipped off to foreign torture dungeons.
This is not okay. The way they're coming into cities, not just Minneapolis, but around the country, is not okay.
The New York Post reporting Good was a member of ICE Watch, a national leftist activist group dedicated to documenting, tracking, and resisting ICE operations. Video shortly before she was shot and killed, capturing Good and her wife speaking with ICE.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. Show your face. I'm not mad at you. That's okay. We don't change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later.
Now, our research are finding multiple similar ICE Watch groups scattered across the country, including national organizations like United We Dream, States at the Core, and ICE List, but also at the local and regional level, like ICE Watch, BAM Migra Watch, and Vecinos Unidos DFW. Vice President J.D. Vance calling the shooting in Minneapolis an attack on federal law enforcement.
That woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job.
Now, while the Trump administration has called the fatal shooting a response to domestic terrorism, many Democratic lawmakers have condemned the ICE agents' actions. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries calling it a, quote, abomination, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker another example of the administration ignoring due process. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting Thursday on the nationwide protests across Iran. The U.S. ambassador to the UN reiterated that the U.S. stands behind the people of Iran and that President Trump is a man of action. Iran's crackdown on demonstrations has killed over 2,000 people, according to human rights groups. Iran's ambassador to the UN accused the U.S. of having direct involvement in steering the unrest in Iran to violence. U.S. officials deny those allegations. The last time Iran had a revolution was 1979. In 1978, widespread strikes, demonstrations, and civil unrest drove backlash towards the Shah's government, which was known for his corruption and unpopular rapid westernization. In January 1979, the Shah was forced to flee Iran. The new anti-Western leader of Iran took over in February, and the Islamic Republic was formed. In the aftermath, November of 1979, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was seized, taking dozens of hostages and keeping them for over a year. The start of the second phase in the Gaza ceasefire plan is now underway. The new phase includes a new Palestinian committee to run Gaza day to day. The announcement of the second phase came with a warning. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff cautioned Hamas fully comply with ceasefire plans or face serious consequences. New information: the aircraft used in the alleged drug boat strike last September near Venezuela was part of a fleet of disguised planes painted to look like a civilian aircraft. According to the New York Times, the plane is allegedly part of a secret U.S. fleet used in surveillance operations. The Times also reports that the weapons were stored inside the fuselage rather than visibly under the wings, which is contrary to military protocol. On Capitol Hill, Republicans on the House Oversight Committee are moving forward with criminal contempt of Congress charges against former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for refusing to sit for depositions related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation.
So we're trying to get answers from the American people. We're serious about it. Once again, not a single Democrat showed up. You know how many depositions we've done? There's always a Democrat here. The former President of the United States, former Secretary of State, neither one of them. Not a single Democrat here.
Comer is investigating if Epstein helped raise money for the Clinton Foundation. The Clintons released a statement Tuesday that the committee's subpoenas are legally invalid. Former Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith will testify publicly next week about his investigations into President Trump. Smith has been testifying behind closed doors about the probes that led to 2 indictments. He led investigations into Trump's hoarding of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida and his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Both cases were abandoned once Trump won the White House in 2024, since a sitting president can't be indicted.
When women compete against women, it is fair. When you put a man in women's athletics, it's not fair. And women have nowhere else to go. If you take away the fairness in our sports, we literally have nowhere else to go. So anyone can play sports, but where is it most fair? And for women, that's only against women.
The Supreme Court is considering landmark cases in Idaho and West Virginia challenging transgender sports bans. On Wednesday, I spoke to former federal prosecutor John Fishwick to break down that and more. John, you just heard a former college athlete's perspective who is involved in this case. Many have said it does not seem as though Title IX and the 14th Amendment are going to pose as big of a challenge in these cases, given the justice's comments. What do you think?
Yeah, I think particularly Justice Kavanaugh and the other conservative justices were saying today that in order to protect girls and women under Title IX and under the Equal Protection Law, they need to uphold these bans that basically say that transgender girls and women cannot play in girls or women's sports. And the Supreme Court seems comfortable with that. They really seem to be saying in a number of these cases that they're going to leave it up to the states to decide that. So if the states decide that transgender girls and women cannot participate in girls' sports, the Supreme Court seems to be good with that and say that is fine with them. They're going to stay out of it.
We may not get a final decision for months, it looks like, but we'll check in on that. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court could issue a ruling as Trump's tariffs hang in the balance. Another story we are watching. And of course, we don't know in advance which cases, John, will be decided. But if we zoom in on Trump using the emergency powers to authorize his global tariffs, how likely is it that justices actually uphold that as lawful?
Yeah, so we'll all be watching our computers tomorrow to see if the tariff case comes down. You know, for Trump to win this case, he's got to run the tables on a number of legal issues. One, as you mentioned, Didi, is the emergency powers, that he has the emergency power to do this. And the other is that Congress appropriately delegated this power to him under this 1977 law. If I have to read the tea leaves here, I think the Supreme Court is going to strike down the tariffs that President Trump has imposed at the beginning of his administration. His administration has backup arguments to put on new tariffs if that is the case. But looking at that oral argument, I think the Supreme Court is going to strike down the tariffs because Trump has to win several issues, and I don't think he can win them all.
President Trump said today the government will cut off payments to sanctuary cities starting in February due to their immigration policies. Can he legally do that?
So, Didi, I think what President Trump signaled today is he wants to take this case to the Supreme Court. He's lost 2 of these battles with district courts in San Francisco and in New York. But I think what he's saying is, I'm going to appeal these decisions. I'm going to withhold the funds on February 1st. I expect to lose some of these early court decisions and that the judges will say, I can't do that. But they want to take this to the Supreme Court where they've had a very broad and muscular view of executive presidential power. And so I think Trump's legal team wants to take the case there.
We'll see. Former federal prosecutor John Fishwick, thank you for joining us tonight on the National News Desk.
Thank you.
We've seen a 5-time improvement in overall survival for metastatic lung cancer patients, but only at 10%. So while there's been great improvement there, there's still a long way to go.
People are now living longer after getting cancer. A new American Cancer Society report shows a record 70% of cancer patients live 5 years after their diagnosis. The report also shows a drastic improvement in survival rates for Americans with some of the deadliest cancers like myeloma. However, there's been a rise in the number of cases of several common cancers. President Donald Trump has unveiled a framework of a new health care policy addressing rising costs of health insurance plans. The White House proposal revolves around putting money into health savings accounts paid directly to individuals instead of subsidies for insurance companies. The plan also calls for codification of President Trump's most favored nation policy to lower drug prices.
All of these proposals that are within the Great Healthcare Plan are incredibly popular with the American people, and they will impact everyone, not just a small fraction of those who are within the healthcare marketplace, but every single American will continue to see their costs go down.
At the end of last year, tax subsidies tied to certain Affordable Care Act plans expired, drastically raising costs for up to 22 million Americans. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says Democrats will present their counterproposal in a few weeks.
We'll present a plan that'll help parents afford child care and help families afford health care. Lowering costs will be our North Star, now and for all of 2026.
Earlier this week, the Senate did not pass a bill out of the House that would have extended those insurance subsidies for 3 years. Senate Republicans have not unveiled their own plan. It's unclear if they will support President Trump's proposal. Recently, the fentanyl crisis has seen a sharp decline, with opioid deaths dropping and fewer deadly pills making their way into the U.S. Let's go to Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team, and you've been looking into what could be behind this trend, Emma.
Yeah.
How many fentanyl pills? Let's just start with this. How many were seized in 2025? What are the latest numbers?
So from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, they seized 45.2 million fentanyl pills in 2025, which is equivalent to more than 380 million lethal doses of fentanyl, just to put things into perspective here. And in 2024, the DEA seized more than 60 million fentanyl-laced counterfeit pills and nearly 8,000 pounds of fentanyl powder.
Is it safe to say that less fentanyl is coming into the U.S. because of President Trump's crackdown on the southern border, or is there more to the story?
So from what I found, the Trump administration says its border crackdown is cutting fentanyl trafficking, but the full impact on the total supply is really hard to measure in real time. But a House Homeland Security border brief cites CBP data showing that fentanyl seizures at the southwest border were 679 pounds in May of 2025, which is down from 70% that they saw in May of 2024. Overall, though, opioid overdose deaths have been steadily declining the last couple of years, so take that with what you will.
70%, I mean, even in a relatively short amount of time is significant, though, worth noting. Emma,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thanks.
For more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code or visit thenationaldesk.com. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the massive fraud scandal in Minnesota to limiting children's exposure to social media.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The Minnesota Social Services fraud scandal, which some say has cost taxpayers billions of dollars, continues to make headlines.
Looking for Safari transportation?
No, there's no Safari transportation here.
We're just looking for Safari transportation.
We don't know.
So, but this is registered for Safari transportation 607.
That's the address. Okay, we don't know.
This is fraud taking place.
Conservative influencer Nick Shirley releasing a new video this past week in his efforts to uncover more alleged fraud. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, what are the latest allegations and why is he targeting the Somali community?
So, Steve, the latest allegations zero in on the non-emergency medical transportation businesses that are billing the state for millions of dollars for rides that allegedly never happened. Now, Nick Shirley's new video focuses on this, and it was released this past week. It had a very similar format to the first viral video Shirley made, which highlighted the alleged daycare fraud centers that were billing the state for millions of dollars. But when Shirley went to visit these centers in his video, they were closed, boarded up, and did not appear to be legit operating businesses. As for the focus on the Somali community, a large portion of the social services fraud in Minnesota are connected to Somali-run businesses. For example, Steve, Somalis reportedly own 90% of the transportation businesses in Minnesota. They also run a lot of the daycares in question. Now, the Somali community is a powerful political force in the state, and this is causing critics to speculate that that's why the alleged fraud was allowed to run for so long and to reach such a massive scale.
The man who's running the daycare, he was celebrating with Mayor Fry after he won re-election of mayor inside of Minneapolis. And then this lady right here seems to be a friend of Ilhan Omar.
And Nick Shirley will be here, Steve, on Capitol Hill next Wednesday to testify before Congress about what he's reported on regarding that alleged fraud in Minnesota.
Well, meanwhile, U.S. senators are focusing on the ways federal government could limit young kids' exposure to social media. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, lawmakers here on Capitol Hill are taking a hard look at kids' screen time, both at home and in the classroom. This comes as concerns grow over the impact of social media on children and teenagers. The Senate held a hearing this past Thursday focused on how technology is changing childhood, with experts warning heavy social media use is affecting students' attention, their learning, and their social development. Here's Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington on the issue.
The University of Washington released a study last week finding that teenagers spend on average more than an hour per day on smartphones during school hours, and 1 in 4 students spends a quarter of their school day on those personal phones.
Now Congress is moving toward action. Steve, there's actually a bipartisan measure. It's called Kids Off Social Media Act, reintroduced by Senators Ted Cruz and Brian Schatz. It would ban social media use for children under the age of 13. For teens under 17, the bill would also limit the use of algorithms that push and recommend content. Now, this legislation would go a step further in schools, requiring any school that receives federal funding to restrict access to social media on school-issued devices and networks. And right now, support for limiting screen times is growing among Americans. Dozens of states have already moved to restrict cell phone use in public schools. A Pew Research survey released last summer finding nearly 3/4 of U.S. adults support banning cell phones during class, and more than 40% favor a full-day ban. So at a time when Washington is very divided, this is turning out to be a bipartisan issue, Steve.
National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, excellent reporting as always. Thanks for your hard work, and back to you.
Coming up next, Waste Watch, the simple steps you can take to get your money back on unused gift cards turned over to the state. Plus, a terrifying sight in the sky, the peaceful ride gone wrong, and it's all caught on camera. National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in New York, where state officials remind residents they may be able to get back money left on unused gift cards.
They're easy to buy, but also easy to forget.
Gift cards. What many people don't realize is just how often those cards go unused. According to the New York State Comptroller's Office, more than $28 million in unused gift cards were turned over as unclaimed funds in 2025 alone. If a gift card goes unused for 5 years, retailers are legally required to hand that money over to the Office of Unclaimed Funds.
The law is really about protecting people's money and making sure that they can always have a right to claim it. We always encourage, when you receive a gift card, we encourage everyone who receives a gift card to register it. All the gift card companies will have a website or a telephone number that you can call and register your name.
In Sand Springs, Oklahoma, a couple is taking a not in my backyard pushback to next level over a proposed data center. To voice their opposition, the Ingrams set up several large signs in their yard. The worry the center will be noisy, increase utility rates, and impact their health and property value.
You know, you're never going to be able to sell if our kid or grandkids or whatever wants to ever sell. Who's going to say, oh yeah, you live right next to a data center, I'll definitely buy your property.
The city is holding a meeting next week for public input on the proposal. In southern Utah, a woman witnessed a hot air balloon crash into a power line near her workplace. Can you imagine seeing this right outside your door? Natalie Garvin was working at a pet store when she saw that balloon coming towards the shop, attempting an emergency landing.
It was so close, and then I kind of saw it like bouncing just a little bit and getting really close to the ground, and you could just hear the gust of wind, and you can hear them yelling from the balloon.
The balloon pilot and trainees stayed in the basket until the power line was de-energized. Still ahead here on the National News Desk, from bets to billions, the explosive growth the gambling industry is adding to America's economy. Plus, the race is on, how you can snag the hottest ticket in LA for the upcoming Olympics. Democratic leadership now feeling a bit better about their party's odds in the midterms. The focus is on North Carolina, Maine, Ohio, and Alaska. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says those will be the 4 states Democrats need to retake the upper chamber. He believes they've got the right candidates for the job and that Texas and Iowa are possible pickups as well. Here's part of the Democratic plan.
We're going to do the cost of groceries and the monopolization of the food industry. We're going to do health care. We're going to do electric costs and tariffs raising everyone's price, and finally the cost of child care. So we think we're in strong shape to win the Senate.
Democrats also have to defend their vulnerable Georgia seat while defending seats held by retiring senators in Michigan and New Hampshire. The gambling industry is the second fastest growing sector in the U.S. in terms of economic growth. That's according to a Bureau of Labor Statistics report. Kalshi and Polymarket are the top betting markets. Analysts say betting demand is being driven by younger Americans who feel pushed out of the economy.
When you turn to your wife at 40 and the two of you have been married for 5 years and you say, I don't think we're ever going to be able to afford to have children, how does that make you feel as a man? Right? And how does it make your wife feel about you as a partner and provider? You have let each other down. You have failed at the game of life. And that makes people angry. And I can't blame them for it.
However, a recent Pew Research poll shows young people view these markets as bad for society. That's especially true for men. The hottest ticket in Los Angeles might be a couple years away. Registration to enter the lottery to buy tickets for 2028 Olympic events is now open. Actual tickets don't go on sale until the spring. To get those, buyers must first create profiles on la28.org. Registering for the ticket lottery is free. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings, and you can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton here in Washington, and from all of us here, have a great week.